This is the big one, Elizabeth. We're coming to join you. Me and my listeners, we're coming to join you, Elizabeth. This is Funny Like a Clown podcast. I am your host, Dennis Wirth. June 14th, 2020. This is episode 65. Here to discuss legendary, and I do mean going way back there, legendary comedian Red Foxx. As always, Funny Like a Clown podcast is brought to you by G Vegas Buffalo Sauce. For lightning in your mouth, get the homemade, fresh, go green taste of G Vegas, available at www.gvegas.webs.com, shipped right to your door, fresh, and have it for your next backyard barbecue with your friends while you're watching the sports game, and they'll be your friends forever because it's that good. John Elroy Sanford, stage name Red Foxx, best known for Sanford and Son. That's what our generation remember him for. He started out, he was known for his raunchy nightclub act in the 50s and 60s. And I mean, if you're doing a raunchy act in the 50s, I mean, that was a time where you didn't do that type of stuff. So I guess he was the Andrew Dice Clay of the 50s and 60s, where other comics were working clean, and he chose to do it the dirty way, which, I mean, I enjoy doing the bar shows, because if you do a bar show, you're performing for a rowdy crowd and a bunch of, drunks where you can say whatever you want, nobody really gives a shit. Where if you're doing a big hall, then you get the family night out where it's older people, then you got to clean up your act, and you really got to watch what you say, and you can't just loosen up and just be natural. You really, oh, is that going to offend them? Can I say that? Can I say it? When you got to think about your act, it's not as funny as when you can just let loose and do whatever you want to do. So here's a guy, man. He played the nightclubs. He was performing for the rowdy people of the time. And back then, boy, that's really making a statement. Performed on over 50 records, okay, where he was a musician also, and along with comedy records. I mean, can you imagine over 50 albums being on that many? I mean, my gosh, if you put out one or two, you're doing good. Five is like, mainstream status. You get into 10 albums, you're legendary. I mean, you're doing 50 albums. I mean, that's just an amazing amount of work right there. I put out one DVD special, and I put out one CD, and it just took years and years and years for me just to finally get together and actually do just one. So to put out that many, that's an impressive record right there. He was known as the Party Record King, okay? If you were throwing a party and you were drinking something and you were smoking something, you had to put on the Red Fox album because it wasn't a party without that album. I mean, we all got that one, comedy album where if you're partying, you tell your friends, hey, we got to listen to this, man. It's so funny. You got to listen to this. I remember doing that, back when I was a teenager with my friends, man. If we had a really good comedy album, you have to listen to it together. Then when you're hanging out, you're constantly shooting quotes back and forth from that album, using them with each other in daily life, and that's all part of growing up, I guess, right there. Let's see. After Sanford and Son, he did the Red Fox Show, which didn't last too long, and the Royal Family, which was another one that didn't last too long. As far as movies, now I got to say, I remember in my era, which probably most of us do, from Sanford and Son, but before that, he was a bigger hit in the 50s and 60s, and that's why he got Sanford and Son. That's probably a time we don't remember, but our parents do. All the Fine Young Cannibals in the 60s, that was a movie that he was in, so who knew he did movies and stuff before that. Cotton Comes to Harlem in the 70s. Norman, Is That You also in the 70s. And here's one we do remember from Harlem Nights in 1989, where Eddie Murphy put him in with him and Richard Pryor, because Eddie Murphy wanted to work with the people that inspired him to do comedy. And this guy, Red Fox, man, he inspired a lot of people to want to do comedy. We'll get that a little later in the podcast, but, you always say, who is the original? Who is the original dirty act? Well, this guy, man, going back to the 50s, he was one of the original ones, because he was doing it in a time when nobody else was doing it. It was too dangerous to do. Nowadays, if you're dirty, it's an acceptable thing, because modern day things, you can do that. Back then, oh my God, people wouldn't even talk to you if you talk like that. You were known as the town bum or something if you talked like that. It was so far past inappropriate, it wasn't stuff that you did. Let's see, voted number 24 on Comedy Central's 100 Greatest Comedians of All Time. And even though he was voted number 24, I mean, some of the guys right at the top, they mentioned this guy as inspiring them to want to do comedy. So, while he was number 24, he inspired the guys that were were right at the top of that list. 3 Golden Globe Awards, 3 more nominations, and 3 Primetime Emmy nominations, and I'd settle for 1 Golden Globe Award. But hey, I got more of a cult following here with the podcast, and I get to do what I want to do. See, I did TV for a few years doing the Comedy Kitchen. Enjoyed the heck out of it, man. There were restrictions on that. You do a podcast, cuffs are off, baby. There's no restrictions, so that's what I enjoy about that. Having fun. Hope you guys are having fun with me, because man, I love learning about what you love. I love comedy. I love learning the history of it, because those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. Let's see, 1992, he was given a star on the St. Louis Walk of Fame, and I knew they did that out in Hollywood. They had the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Who knew St. Louis had their own Walk of Fame where they would give you a star? And I guess he was born in St. Louis, so that's why they gave him a star there along with his legendary career, because that's where he came from. Reminded me like these big-time basketball stars, like Kobe Bryant, then his high school would retire his jersey number, because that's, where he was from, and that's always a great tribute, stuff like that. It's all where it started. When you go back to where you started, okay? So, great stuff there. Let's see. Now he was doing his raunchy nightclub act for a while. On July 27, 1939, he was on Major Bowen's Amateur Hour radio show, which back in the 50s, radio was so much bigger than TV back then, because TV was a new thing, and they thought it was going to be a fad, but the radio shows were so much bigger back then. Groucho Marx, they were all doing the big radio thing before they became the TV stars. It was amateur night. He went on there, he hit a home run, and I guess I didn't know this about him. The reason they called him Red Fox, how he got his nickname, was because he had a red hair complexion, so they named him Red after his red hair complexion. I guess he just thought he was foxy. Who knows? I might not. But if you're going to be a fox, you got to be the Red Fox, right? Because that's just cool, right? So he was the Red Fox. He performed mostly on the East Coast, doing his raunchy nightclubs act and doing his thing. Singer Dinah Washington, who caught his act, insisted that he come out to L.A., which, nowadays, it's a lot easier to become a star anywhere, and, you go to the New York or you go to L.A., and you tap into that scene, but, back then, you can go in any town, any big town, and go on your local street corner, you're going to find a comedy club. Back then, there weren't comedy clubs throughout the United States, okay? If you wanted to try comedy, you had to sell everything in your house, live out of your car, and go move to LA or New York to try comedy, all right? You really had to give something up to do comedy, where nowadays you can do it in your local hometown. It's become such a big thing. Well, he went out to LA, a record label caught his act, and they decided to sign him, and he was one of the first black acts ever to be signed to a contract to perform for all-white audiences in Las Vegas. So, you want to talk about a guy who paved the way for the racial barrier right there? But back then, 50s and 60s, you weren't headlining in Vegas, okay, if you were black. That wasn't a thing you did. This guy pioneered, man. He broke the rules, and he set the stage, to get over that kind of ignorance and, allow other acts, anybody, any big act can go to Vegas nowadays. And just what a pioneer this guy was for the day and age that he did comedy in. He did stuff back then that you just didn't do back then, and he paved the way for the guys today to do it today. So I think that's why he's considered a hero in the comedy, community influence on the comedians, because of, the time and age he did it and what he had to go through back then as compared to what you have to go through now to do it. While in Vegas, he released a series of comedy albums, and most of them became cult classics, where, they weren't like the mainstream thing, but they had a following, and he had a good enough following where he could make a living at it. Not that he was over the top popular at the time, but he had enough of a cult following where he didn't have to work a day job and then do comedy at night like most of us do. This guy could actually make a living at it. Wasn't a big-time millionaire living at the time, but he could do what he did with his cult following, and it's always cool when you get that amount of people that'll follow you, so you can do what you love to do in life. His brother and father's name, it was Fred Sr. and Fred Jr. They were called Fred, and that was where he came up with the name Fred Sanford for Sanford and Son, after his brother and father's name. Sanford and Son, based on a junkyard with daily humor. It was based on racial humor and prejudice, which back then you could get away with that. Not everybody's offended like they are about everything nowadays. The Archie Bunker Show. You could never, ever, All in the Family, you couldn't air that. Today people will go nuts because they'd be so offended. Back then people could take a, it's Archie shooting his mouth off, ha ha ha. You could take a joke. Nobody was offended by nothing back when I grew up, and man, that's really changed. We knew how to take a joke back then, so never thought anything of it, you know. I mean, back then we realized it was a joke. I mean, that's why you laugh, because it wasn't something you do in regular life, you know. It was so ridiculous that you had to laugh about it. Nowadays, it's so ridiculous I get offended by it, you know. It's like, well, you know, if you're taking the joke seriously, it's not meant to be serious, so why would you get offended by it? That's why it's a joke, because it's not meant to be taken seriously. Let's see, the show had running gags, which we all remember, him calling his son Lamont, "You big dummy." Everybody's calling, "Hey, you big dummy." We were calling everybody big dummies back then, and as they opened the show with, "This is the big one, Elizabeth, I'm going to join you." Where his wife was in heaven, and every time he got shook up, he'd act like he was having a heart attack, and, "Hey, I'm coming to join you, Elizabeth." He's going to join his wife in heaven. Here's an interview, which I love this one. He used his starring role in that show to get roles for his friends, okay? And I always thought that was cool because, you know, you never forget who got you there. The people come out to support you, the people who stood by you. When you finally hit the big time, that's who you take care of, because those are the ones, you know, who stuck by you when you were a nobody. And, you know, when I book comedy shows, I got the friends who booked me, and I booked them because, you know, those who stuck by me when I wasn't booking comedy shows are the ones who booked me, you know. And I've had these big-time comedians, because I book comedy in Central Mass, and I've had them contact me, and they are big-time comedians. "Hey, how come you ain't putting me on your show?" It's like, well, I never even met you. Well, try me out, you know. So I'll put them in a small place to try them out, then they'll get pissed I didn't put them on my big show, you know. It's like, well, I never even met you. Now all of a sudden you're my go-to guy on my big shows, you know. But everybody gets an ego. They think they start right at the top. I mean, I don't care how big of a comedian you are. If I never met you, I ain't putting you on my big show. I don't even know you, you know. I'm going to people I can count on. That's who I'm going to right there. So I guess take care of your friends, man. Don't forget where you came from. Don't forget the people who got you there, man. It's always good advice right there. Let's see. NBC did 6 seasons of Sanford and Son, which, man, it was a big hit at the time, from 72 to 77. In 74, the television network sued him for $10 million for not showing up to film for one season, because I guess there was a little bit of a dispute. And if they're suing him for $10 million, how much was this guy making back then? I mean, that's a ridiculous amount of money, especially for the time. If you consider these are the 70s, I mean, 10 million back then must have been like 100 million nowadays. I mean, do the math. That's a lot of money for the time. So, how much was this guy making for Sanford and Son? Let's see. He quit the show in 1977. Where he lost my train of thought here. He quit in 1977, and his co-actors, they found out on the set. He never even let his co-actors know that he was going to quit the show. Everybody showed up for work one day. Hey, where's Red Fox? Where's Red Fox? He quit the show, and they all had to go home. And that kind of rubbed a lot of them the wrong way, where they thought, you know, that he owed it to them. He should have let them know. You know, they shouldn't have had to find out on the set. You know, because when you do a show like that, you're a family. Like I did the Comedy Kitchen, and we all showed up. You bond together, and that's like your family, because you're around them more than you are your actual family, because you're working so much together. And you know, you don't treat family like that. They shouldn't have to show up to work one day and find out they're out of a job. And well, they still love the guy. You know, hey, all good families have their good arguments. They still love the guy. That did rub a lot of people the wrong way. He did a short-lived ABC variety show. 1980, he did a short-lived spinoff of Sanford and Son, where it didn't last too long. You know, I remember the show Dallas with J.R. Ewing and Patrick Duffy. He was one of the big stars of the show, but he wanted to do his own thing, and he quit Dallas to go do his own thing, and nothing really popped up big. He did a few small commercials and stuff, and he went over to Larry Hagman's house one night, and Larry laughed at him and said, you don't realize how tough it is to have a #1 show. You know, you don't catch lightning in a bottle twice, man. If you catch it once, you're lucky, man. Don't ever spit on that thing. You can do something bigger. And they eventually wrote him back into the show, the big shower scene, the return. It was all a dream, you know, when he died or whatever. So, You know, if you catch lightning in a bottle of wine, I hate these big bands, you know, it's like they fight forever to get to the big time status. They get there, then they all hate each other and break up, you know, and then years later they do a reunion tour or whatever. But it's like, hey, fight so hard to get there, there's going to be problems, man. Work through them. Let's see, 1986 on ABC did the Red Fox show. That only lasted 12 episodes. Remember, I caught one of those, and, you know, it was just, he was past his prime at that time. He was trying to make a comeback, but, you know, like I said, you're not going to catch a Sanford and Son like that, a #1 show 2 times in a row. It's very difficult to do. He did the Donnie and Marie show, which was a big show back then. They did a Star Wars special where he appeared as like a Jedi kind of character, so that's kind of funny. He again did another sitcom, The Royal. Woo! Yeah, we sneezed on Funny Like Clown podcast. All right. I hope it's not Corona getting me. Let's hope not. All right. Now it's probably the dust in this studio, but hey, that's what you get at a home studio. Let's see. He did a comeback, The Royal Family, which was again short-lived, just like the Red Fox show. Didn't last too long. He made $4 million in 1 year, and he attributed bad management and being divorced to losing most of his money, which, hey, I know all about the divorce and child support and losing money. Trust me on that one, man. So, let's see. It was reported he had to give $100,000 a month to one of his ex-wives. So can you imagine having to send out a check I don't care how much you make, $100,000 a month that's a lot of money to be sending out to an ex-wife. You know, his lawyer cost him, he said, $150,000 for a lawyer to go through the divorce. The divorce settlement was $300,000 plus $100,000 a month. I mean, this is all adding up and just killing the guy's finances, you know. And, you know, he made the money on Sanford and Son. I'm sure he wasn't making the big time money on, you know, the comeback specials because it wasn't the star, you know, that he was back then. 1983, filed for bankruptcy because of major tax problems. I remember seeing that on TV, that the government was coming after him big time. I remember in Eddie Murphy, when he put him in Harlem Nights, I remember seeing a story about Eddie Murphy. He'd say Red Fox would come on set and he'd be like, hey, I got this watch here. Buy this watch for me for 10 grand, man. That was Elvis's watch. Elvis gave it to me, you know. And Eddie Murphy kind of laughed. He said, well, it's your watch now. It's not Elvis's watch, so I ain't giving you 10 grand for it. But he was looking for money, you know, because, I mean, the government was coming after him so hard. From 83 to 89, he was really going through a tough time with all of that. And the IRS actually went to his home. And I remember seeing this one on TV, and I was like, him talking about it, you can see how crushed he was. IRS, they seized his Las Vegas home and all of his fancy cars and vehicles. They took $12,000 in cash and several guns that he had on him. And he said, you know, they came and they're like, they literally said, how much money you got in your pocket? And he pulled out like $20. We're taking that too. He said it was so demeaning. He said they went in his closets and they were checking the pockets of all his clothes in the closet looking for money. And he said it was just such a demeaning thing that they did to him and so embarrassing. And I guess, you know, hey, government comes after you, man. They're coming with everything they got. They don't treat you nice. I know that. It was reported at the time of his death he owed $3.6 million in back taxes, which, you know, when he was on Sanford and Son, he was making $4 million a year. He probably had that money, but you know, doing these comeback specials and working little clubs, you know, that he was doing, he wasn't at the top of his game. I'm sure he wasn't hurting for money, but he wasn't making the money that he could pay that kind of money that he was making back then, you know. After the divorces and the settlements and the lawyers and you end up broke. That's what they do to you, okay? You think he'd learn his lesson? He didn't learn his lesson. He was married 4 times, which I learned my lesson after 1. I didn't go back for a second fucking round, okay? The last one, he said after the 3rd marriage, he finally learned his lesson. He'd never get married again, which I learned after 1. Took him 3. But he did marry a 4th woman, and he said because after the IRS took everything he had and he was dead broke, she stood by him, and you know, said you know, she stood by him when he had a nickel in his pocket, and that's why he ended up marrying her, because that's true love, when a woman just ain't after your money when they love you if you're dead broke. So good for that woman. She deserved to be married. If I could only find a woman, oh, you know, I found a good girl, but you know, you still gotta be careful. That's all I'm gonna say, man. You learn your lesson, you be careful, okay? Let's see. On the set of the royal family, he had a heart attack, and it was during one of the scenes he was having a heart attack, and he was so famous for on Sanford and Son, "I'm coming, Elizabeth," faking a heart attack. Everybody thought he was just acting. It was part of the scene. They didn't realize the guy's actually having a heart attack here. And after a while, he was on the floor so long, they ran up to him, and he's saying, "Get my wife, get my wife." He knew something was wrong. And let's see. Red Fox actually, well, Richard Pryor, who was voted the #1 comedian of all time, because he's the guy who changed the rules for comedy, but Richard Pryor said his influence was Red Fox. So, I mean, here's a guy, who influenced the #1 comedian of all time. I said earlier we get to it, and here it is. I mean, who is the greatest of all time's inspiration? Well, it was Red Fox, man. I mean, his dirty nightclub acts paved the way for Richard Pryor to bring it really mainstream and do the dirty act, to break the rules in comedy, where you could do comedy, dirty comedy, in a mainstream thing, where Red Fox, he was doing it a small stream Vegas act. Well, Richard Pryor, he brought it to the mainstream comedy club act. So Fox paved the way for the #1 comedian of all time. Chris Rock, he also attributes Red Fox being one of his influence. Here's what I didn't know, man. This was interesting. I mean, Jamie Foxx actually chose that stage name, the last name Fox, as a tribute to Red Fox. So who knew, take his name. I mean, they say the biggest form of flattery is impression. I mean, well, Jamie Foxx, that's some pretty flattering stuff, but he's going to take the last name as his stage name, so good for him. In Living Color, Damon Wayans once appeared as Red Fox, talking to people about how they should pay their taxes. So I guess it was a running joke just how bad the government actually beat this guy up on taxes, where you don't want to end up like Red Fox, man. Pay your freaking taxes, okay? Family Guy did a Star Wars episode where he was an X-Wing pilot, and I remember, I think I might have seen it on YouTube or something. I was cracking up seeing that. I mean, here's a guy they're paying tribute. Yeah, he was one of the greatest comedians of all time, but the next generation, they probably don't remember, the 20-year-old kids of nowadays. So it's good when they did it. The Simpsons actually paid tribute to him in one of their episodes too. So, when you got the hottest shows of the time paying tribute to you, that's always a cool thing. After, I guess he was pronounced dead on set when he had the heart attack there. The paramedics came. They rushed him to the hospital, where he was resuscitated. Then later he was pronounced dead at the hospital also. But what a legendary career, man. Red Fox. I mean, just, you're influencing the #1 comedian of all time because of what you did on a smaller scale, where he was able to, imitate what you did and bring it to a major scale. And Richard Pryor, as we all know, went down as the biggest legend of all time in comedy. I remember that. Let's go back to the commercial there. It was a great commercial whoever did it. Elvis changed music, Howard Stern's changed radio, and Richard Pryor, he changed comedy, man, okay? Because back then all you were listening to was clean, and he showed you could go mainstream with a dirty act, and that's what really changed comedy, where nowadays you can say whatever you want, where the Lenny Bruces and George Carlins, they get arrested, they fought for free speech. Once you got it, Richard Pryor showed you what free speech was, so that was always cool. All right, let's see what the fans got to say here. They wrote in about Red Fox. Nancy Ann says, "I love Sanford and Son." And yeah, as we were kids, that was all our generation when we grew up on. What we know him best from was Sanford and Son, and that was must-watch TV. I mean, we didn't get all the channels back then you get today, man. We had a few channels, and that was one of the main TV shows on one of the main channels, and it was must-see because wasn't much else on to compete with it. Michael Buster McMahon writes in, how he wanted LaWanda Page for the Aunt Esther role and was willing to walk away from the producers, said she didn't have any TV acting experience. And we talked about that. He's taking care of his friends, all right? This is my friend. I want to work with one of my friends. Because you want to be around people, you can trust. You don't want strangers on there. So good for him. He stuck up for his friends, didn't forget where he came from. Joe Paul writes in, "You big dummy." See, it's still a catchphrase even nowadays, okay? I know he's calling me a big dummy, but I am a big dummy. I don't give a shit. I do whatever. Some people like me. Some people get offended. I don't give a shit. Because you can't please 100% of the people 100% of the time. Be you, folks. They like you, great. If they don't, get the fuck out. Let's see. Joe Paul writes in, "To Aunt Esther, I'm going to make some dough, press your face in it, and make gorilla cookies." he had a lot, telling off Esther was what, his dead wife's sister. She used to stop by to see his son Lamont, and they didn't get along. And he always had, but that was one of the funny things of the show. He always had a good insult for her, and it became one of the running gags where he'd come up with new ways to insult her every time she came over. And she played it too. The look on her face when she got insulted, it's like you could tell, I'm coming to get you, sucker, man. It was really good. Steve GB writes in the honest or insults, which I just mentioned. Jay Vance writes in, all the fake heart attacks. This is the big one. I'm coming, Elizabeth. Another running gag. See, even today, everybody remembers the gags from the show. That's when you know you got a great show, and this many years later, people are still remembering what you did and talking about it. Dennis Mulroy writes in, you got to wash your ass. I don't mean your whole ass, I mean your asshole. And that's one of his jokes, which, that's raunchy for today. Can you imagine telling that joke in the 50s? I mean, that's just unheard of back then, but he had the cult following that accepted. Some people like the dirty comedy. I always like dirty comedy because it wasn't something I do in real life, I mean, in real life, I try to be a straightforward person, which, comedy is my escape from real life. All right, let's be dirty and do what you wouldn't do in real life, Some people get offended. Hey, that's on them. I don't get offended by any. Adam Myers writes in his bit part in Family Guy, the Star Wars special, which we mentioned, good for the cartoons, give a tribute to such a legend. Gary E. Byrne, this is the big one. Coming to join you, Elizabeth. I'm still talking about it. Nate Thomas writes in, you got to wash your ass, not your whole ass, but your asshole. You don't know what kind of funk can hide in something the size of a dime or a $50. Shit, you know the size of your asshole better than I do. I mean, these are jokes, just dirty, dirty stuff of the time. Justin Nano writes in, Lamont, you big dummy. Telling Aunt Esther, you don't believe in God, it's just like telling Jimmy Carter there ain't no more toothpaste. Jimmy Carter, the president, had the big teeth of the time. These are the insults, back then it's like we wanted to hear the insults. Nowadays, everybody gets offended by the insults, You just couldn't do this stuff back then, but it's a different day and age, Say what you want. Is it better? Is it worse? I like that day and age where you can take a joke and laugh about anything. I don't like a day and age where you got to be careful no matter what you say. You might offend somebody. It's not my thing. What do you guys think? I think if you tune into this podcast, you can take a joke, and I want to thank you for that because laughter is the best medicine. This is Funny the Clown Podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Wirth. Keep them laughing. Be you. If you like clean comedy, do clean comedy. Listen to clean comedy. If you like dirty comedy, do dirty comedy. Listen to dirty comedy. This is America. You don't need everybody's approval to be you. Be you. Keep laughing. And until next week, we'll catch you next time. Be good. Bye.